There is a particular quality to the light in Nami in July. A kind of heavy gold that settles on everything like a promise half kept. On 8th of July 2026, that light fell on something the Sahel has not seen before. Never. A Russian foreign minister touching down on Nigerian soil for the very first time. Not as a visitor passing through, not as a tourist, but as an architect. Sergei Lavrov stepped off that aircraft and into a moment that has been built since the coup days. Since Bamako turned us back on Paris, since Ouagadougou raised the AES flag, since Niamey told the French, pack your bags and leave. Ladies and gentlemen, the pieces are no longer scattered on the board. They have been assembled into a formation, and that formation now has a name. They are calling it in diplomatic cables the 3+1. Russia, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, 4 nations, 1 table, and 1 vision of Africa that does not ask for permission from anyone. Ladies and gentlemen, and that is what they call the second awakening of Africa. You see, now with regards to what was actually said in that room, because it is easy to get lost on the flags and the handshake and the ceremony, you know, the drums that were beaten, the traditional reception that was offered to our esteemed foreign minister Sergei Lavrov. Lavrov opened the consultations with a phrase that will echo beyond Niamey. He called it the second awakening of the African continent. The first awakening, he said, was in 1960 when African nations won their political independences. Minds that craved freedom, minds that wanted independence, but over the years, it has been overshadowed by neocolonialism. They raised their own flags, they wrote their own constitution, but the economic change was there. Those were simply painted over. The former colonial powers kept their hands on the minerals, the resources, the financial levers that dictate the calculus of economic and political independence. Political freedom without economic sovereignty. That was the half-finished revolution. And here's a conference room in Niamey. Lavrov offers something different. He declared that Russia and the AES are united. And I quote, by a common understanding of the need to build a fair multipolar world order and by our joint efforts against neocolonial practices which remain very much alive among our Western colleagues. That was what Lavrov said. So let that sentence breathe for a moment. This was not a negotiation, this was not a request, this was a declaration delivered on African soil, flanked by the foreign minister of 3 nations that have burned their bridges with the West and not looking back. Now, burning bridges does not really mean the bridges no longer stay there or standing, but they are saying the bridge of neocolonialism is going to fall, and there's another bridge that is going to rise, a bridge that will be dictated by mutual respect, a bridge that will be dictated by win-win partnership, where Pan-African sovereignty has a voice, where Africans will no longer be judged by their color or by what they look like, but by the content of their character and by their strategic relevance. Ladies and gentlemen, the sun of neocolonialism is setting in the Sahel, and a new sun of multipolarity is rising. Did you see that? Now, it is very, very important that we look into the architecture of what they're trying to build. So what was actually built in that room? That's the billion-dollar question, because rhetoric without architecture is just poetry, and this was not poetry, this was concrete. 3 pillars emerged from the Niamey consultation. The first, the foreign minister policy coordination. A formal memorandum was signed, established regular consultations between the foreign ministers, all right, and their ministry. An action plan, a rhythm. These 4 nations are not just aligned, they are now institutionally bound. Annual meetings will be held, shared diplomatic positions, a common voice at the United Nations. Let that sink in. France used to be the voice that spoke on behalf of the Sahel in the United Nations for a very long time. But that is about to change. and it has changed already. The second, they talked about media sovereignty. Russia-AES States Network signed a cooperation agreement with the AES Media Network. Let us be very clear about what this means. The AES nation has spent years fighting what they call Western propaganda. Narrative written in Paris, in Washington, in Brussels, in London about who they are and what they deserve and what they do not deserve. This agreement is them saying we will tell our own story on our own terms. On our own terms, ladies and gentlemen, let us take it with our own partners. Now, the third pillar, and I need to be very, very clear on that. This is the one that will keep diplomats in the Western capital awake tonight. Lavrov confirmed that Russia will continue its support for what is now being called the AES United Force, which they call the FUAES, which has a total capacity and capability of about 15,000 personnel with a lot of equipment from China and Russia. When you look at the security architecture, it breathes multipolarity. Now, this language in the joint communique was precise, and I'm going to read it to you. Growing military and military technical cooperation. This is not advisory. This is not training manuals. This is not some PowerPoint presentation that happens in the African Forward Summit and all of that. This is hardware, ladies and gentlemen. This is the African core with boots stomping on the ground, and not just stomping on the ground, stomping on the enemies of the Sahel, like we've seen on the July 8th. And irons in the sky, like the Barktirs from Turkey, the Tayak Songo. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the transformation of three separate armies into something that is beginning to look very much like a block. They call it multipolar block. And now, ladies and gentlemen, this is where it gets truly unprecedented. Niger's foreign minister Bakari Yao Sangare stood before the cameras and said something that no Sahelian diplomat would have dared to author 5 years ago. It described Russia, and I'm quoting directly, the main ally in the fight against terrorism in the Sahel. Not France, not the United States, not the European Union. He said Russia. Remember the narrative that was being built around the United States sending some military capability to Niamey, where they said US is now been a security partner. But when they say Russia, that is a big statement that debunks every propaganda. And then the joint statement went further. It alleged explicitly that the external state actors, including Ukraine, France, have been involved in the attacks to destabilize the region. They put it in writing. They signed this with their own names on it. Let us understand the gravity of that accusation. They are saying the jihadist violence that has killed tens of thousands across the Sahel, including the defense minister, is not a purely organic insurgency. They are outside, hands on the blade. They are saying that there are outside hands on the blade, and they named names. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not their usual way of operating, but now they are saying that France and Ukraine is a part of it. The billion-dollar question we should ask at this point is, who does France and Ukraine represent? The response from Moscow was not to deflect or soften the language. The response was to pledge more training for the unified AES forces, more arms, more coordination, and the African Corps, the paramilitary successor of the Russian Wagners, now formally integrated into the Russian Ministry of Defense, was explicitly thanked and communicated for his role. Malian officials entered what they call innovative approaches in security cooperation. We do not yet know the full shape of this approach. But when you combine Russian military doctrine with African manpower, ladies and gentlemen, and the mineral wealth of the Sahel in a single strategic framework, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, you are no longer talking about a counter-terrorism operation. You are talking about a military alliance being formed before our very eyes. Given the fact that something beautiful has been built, Lavrov did not come to Niamey empty-handed. It carried an invitation from the president of Russia himself, the president of Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and now formally invited to the 3rd Russian African Summit in Moscow this October. The agenda: trade, investment, economic cooperation. The framework is no longer just security. It is full architecture of state-to-state relations. Now, what was born in that conference room on July 8th is not transactional arrangement. It is not mercenaries for minerals, like, the Western media try to frame it. If the communiques are to be believed, a bloc, a pole, a new center of gravity on the continent that spent centuries being pulled into everyone's orbit, it's been built. The Sahel has chosen its alignment, not with the West, not with the East, in the old Cold War sense, but with a vision of sovereignty that says we will decide who our friends are. Nobody will dictate to us. We will decide who trains our soldiers. We will decide who tells our story. We will form our own core value system. And the world, the old world, that one that thought that the Sahel will always be his backyard. Let's go grab some uranium, It's still trying to figure out what just happened on the July 8th tsunami. So families, what do you think about this? Is the Russia pact a genuine pact to sovereignty? Because we have to look at this truly. Or this is just a new dependence being dressed in a different color called diplomacy. Can the unified AES force actually hold the desert? Do they have the technical and the mechanical wherewithal? So we're watching a construction of something that looks strong on paper, but a test of time would definitely check and balance this new structure that is being formed. Ladies and gentlemen, you can drop your comment in the comment section below. Let's build this understanding together. And if you enjoy this breakdown, families, kindly do well to hit the like, share and subscribe button. And if you feel generous, leave a comment for us in the comment section below, because if you don't, you definitely know that Android will cry. Until the next one, family, the October summit is coming and the Sahel will not be the same when it is over. So I want to take this time out to thank the sponsors of this video: Marinator, By Design, Ignatius Moore, Omaketa, Simanera, Mr. Nelson. I mean, a lot of you all are great people, and I really want to say thank you to the Android community for your solidarity and support. Homeland or death, we move.